Okay, you are free to go.
Nice.
Okay, so anyways, I haven't actually prepared an opening statement this time because I didn't think I'd need to, considering the informal nature of our conversations. Um, but I have got listed 5 points I'd like to talk about today. And those points go as follows. First off, I didn't say mutualism would be more pragmatic in our text debate, which is before the first debate. I didn't mention mutualism being more practical or pragmatic. I said it's as far as we can practically decentralize economic power. And on top of that, it's a good thing because this necessarily empowers more people and gives them more control over their lives and labour. So that's point number one. We can talk about that more in depth if we disagree. Second point was property in capitalism / rule by absentee owner, economic power, is forced upon the users of property. So before we talked about this idea that mutualism is fine as long as it's not enforced upon everyone else. Well, actually, it's capitalism which enforces itself on non-owners. So, for example, squatters. If a squatters movement took over some unoccupied property, the forces of property would descend upon them and force them out, or at worst, imprison them. Same goes for sitting strikers, same goes for expropriators. They are necessarily suppressed by abstract property laws, which are enforced upon material reality. It is capitalism enforcing itself upon non-proprietors. Second, capitalism reproduces itself. People with capital are incentivized by virtue of property enforcement in the first place to invest in capitalistic firms and not cooperatives. So justifying capitalism by this voluntarist route is therefore circular, because if capitalism already relies on property and the enforcement of property incentivizes more capitalism, well, saying, oh, well, people choose to be capitalist is kind of relying on capitalism to justify itself. To add to that second point, I'm still on point number 2. Mutualism does not prevent workers from obeying the command of a colleague voluntarily or democratically dedicating disproportionate amount of the profits they produce towards this guy's income. In fact, why not support workplace democracy and allow capitalistic hierarchical workplaces to voluntarily compete in the market of ideas, which is what you believe mutualism should do in New York State, I guess, without imposing itself on the users of property. And my third point is that property as an economic power which concentrates power based on purchase and investment. This is called a plutocracy. It necessarily disempowers non-property owners and alienates them from their other liberal rights. So we talked about this at the start of the last debate. This was in my previous opening statement rather. I'm not doing a job application here. But I talked about this idea that property necessarily negates or alienates people from the so-called inalienable rights that liberalism promises us. So, for example, I've talked about the idea that free speech in a capitalist enterprise is non-existent. You can't criticize your boss openly or honestly without risking your job or without risking your chance of promotion or whatever. So you're effectively surrendering a lot of your rights to capitalism. Another example of this is like, well, if you go back to the old sit-ins or any kind of strike action, they say, well, this is happening on my property, therefore I have the right to defend my property with lethal means if necessary. Therefore, lethal force was justified by the justification of property against striking workers who were doing like sit-ins and things like that. Workplace sabotage, again, like they used that kind of defence of property use to justify lethal force. It's only because of state intervention this doesn't happen anymore. But as I said before, this is just like duct tape around a flawed system, inherently flawed system. Fourth, value is a combination of two forms, use and exchange. So the use value refers to the features of an object which make it useful to human ends. We're talking about the object, the objective features about an object, about a thing, about a commodity. So, for example, food, it has nutritional value to me, which exists whether I like it or not. And then we have exchange, which is a socialized, intersubjective, and is dependent on the opinions of consumers / valuers. So to have value in the first place, you need to have someone who wants it. So value altogether, or as Proudhon called it, constituted value, was a combination of these two forms of value. but they kind of function differently. Use value comes either naturally or as a product of labour. So to make materials physically valuable or have features which are valuable to other people, you need to manipulate it into something else. So a lot of wood just stuck in a tree is not really valuable until I take the wood and turn it into a table. Capitalism, that means that use value comes from labour, not ownership. Capital must be manipulated by labour to play a role in production. Capitalism itself is not productive. Labour without capital eventually creates capital. So that means labour is the source of value and not necessarily ownership. Well, not at all ownership. Natural features and labour is where value comes from, where use value comes from. So this means that profits extracted thanks to the ownership of capital is necessarily extracted off the back of the non-owner's labour. Hence the exploitative relationship established within capitalist firms. Number 5, this is an interesting one we didn't really talk about at all, I don't think, but this is one of the contradictions capitalism Proudhon pointed out. So as a solution to the misery caused by division of labour, I can get into that if you're not sure what that means, machinery comes with its own contradictions. So every generation sees workers losing jobs because of new machinery, as new machinery makes workers more effective at their own expense. So what I mean by that is a factory of 30 workers could implement some kind of machinery to help them produce more, but with less workers. So effectively, it justifies sacking 25 workers, and the factory's floor still becomes, but it's still more productive. So that's a little contradiction there in the workplace because of what's it called? The class divide within workplaces. So I mentioned here that this contradiction is caused by class division in the workplace. Worker cooperatives can sustainably introduce machinery into the workplace without costing their own jobs. Actually, it's interesting because Adam Smith noted that labour-saving innovations actually came from the workforce wanting to make their jobs easier. And Proudhon points out that such innovation often comes at the worker's expense and the owner's profit. So those were the 5 points I wanted to bring up today. That wasn't an opening statement which I've written before, I just sort of was spitballing there. But I'll leave it over to you.
Okay, thank you, ThoughtBat. Just to reiterate, this is a continuation of the previous debate, and there will be a link for it in the description of the video. Neolib, you have the floor.
Yeah, I think looking back at our other conversation, I didn't actually look through it. I think I watched like maybe 10 minutes, but if I remember correctly, I think there was probably a little bit of a misunderstanding between both of us. So I want to try to sum up your position real quick first. So you don't actually want to implement any state policy. You want to sort of essentially eclipse the private sector with cooperatives through activism and sort of the formation of anarchist federations and all that, right?
That's the basic principle, yeah.
Okay. I actually don't have any problem with that. So could you just start off with your first point?
So start off with my first point.
Yeah.
So I didn't say mutualism would be more practical or pragmatic. I only said it was as far as we can practically decentralize economic power. I said this is a good thing because it necessarily empowers more people and gives them more control over their lives and labour.
So when I look up the definition of practical, it seems like, to me, that just sounds like a pragmatic argument, but it isn't. I don't think it really matters for the sake of this conversation. So what was the second one?
So we'll just stick on it for a bit. I'm not making a pragmatic argument. I'm just saying that's as far as we can practically go. So I'm not saying it's the most practically we can do things. I'm just saying that's as far as we can practically go. Whether or not it's more practical than capitalism is beside the point. But the second point was that property / capitalism / rule by absentee owner is forced upon the users of property. So last time we talked about you're happy with my system as so long as I don't enforce it on capitalism or forcibly eclipse capitalism with it. It's actually the other way around. It's actually property enforcing itself upon non-owners of property. So for example, if I decided to stop paying rent, well, the landlord's going to eventually use force to drag me out of the building. If a workforce started to do a sit-in strike, then police would be called to remove them. If squatters occupied a vacant but owned house, then again the police could come in and take them away. So it's actually capitalism which enforces itself on usufruct relations to objects.
So I guess on the part of like coercion, I don't find coercion necessarily inherently bad. I think some form of coercion is probably needed to maintain stability in almost any society. But
I didn't mention coercion.
or did you say force? Right? Isn't using force, like forcing people to do things, isn't that coercion?
I think there's differences there, but using force is what I said.
Okay. To me, using force is coercion. Is there a reason why I shouldn't consider forcing people to do things coercive?
I'd say there's coercive elements to certain relationships. So, like, I can say blackmailing someone is coercive, but you're not necessarily using force. You know what I mean?
Oh, okay.
So,
okay.
If I say you tell me a secret and I threaten to tell everyone else the secret, that's coercion, but it's not force. There's a difference there.
Okay, so in that sense, I even think that using force is probably fine. You probably need that to maintain stability in society anyway. Like, I'm pretty sure even in mutualism, you probably need force to, I guess whatever rights you would have. I'm not sure where your system goes, but I guess I don't know if that's a point worth like arguing over. But on the second part that you said about how capitalism is enforced on people, yeah, I agree. I think basically any system or state that you sort of like exist in and are born in, you're forced to live in that system. The reason why I would oppose sort of mutualist mandates, which I know that's not your position, but that was my position, is not in principle because I don't think people should be forced to do things necessarily. It's mainly because I think it's not clear that we could maintain the same economic stability and output. And I also think it's important for the state to be able to provide certain services at a base amount. So it's not really in principle. If like a mutualism works and people are forced to live under mutualism, if it was like demonstrated to be better than capitalism, I don't see anybody who would be opposed to that. So I don't know if that helps clear up my position on that.
Yeah, but I would take the opposite view, right? So if I was to go back to one of the positions I did hold in my conversation before, I said that I think mutualism is more practical than communism. But that wouldn't mean I would be happy to force mutualism upon communists or people who want to live in a commune. I'm not going to go in there with my mutualist army and say, right, okay, you're mutualist now, you're not communists.
Oh, well, okay. Well, I mean, in that case, like, so you're saying that you just want people to organize themselves however they want, right?
Yeah, there's limitations with that in terms of like how practically this kind of self-organization can really go. But yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. It's just that to me, I sort of like, because my ideal society, anybody would be able to do whatever they wanted, essentially. But obviously, like, that's not practical, and it's not clear to what extent we could have people under different economic systems or different rules on private property could coexist in a society. So I agree with you, but I guess for me, I'm more concerned with what can demonstrably be the case for us to implement right now. I'm not principally objected to that, to mutualism. Like, ideally, for me, you could have like I don't know, you can even say maybe some sort of like hierarchical like Christian societies. As long as they sort of like there was some sort of standard for human rights, it wouldn't bother me as long as we could all coexist. But I guess that's the problem right there, right?
Okay, but that fence sitting only goes so far, doesn't it? So, like, if we had the squatters example, and they moved into a owned home, but it was vacant, they just moved in there, like the Christianians did in Copenhagen. That society effectively came about from an illegal squatters movement. They moved into property that was owned by other people but not used by them. And then the police necessarily going to get involved in part of the owners. Now, I would say I am pro-squatter. What would you say?
I guess for me, it honestly really just depends on the system. Because like I'm concerned with a certain level of like human well-being and expression of values that I care about. Ideally, like I said, there wouldn't be squatters, and there'd be people who believe in property rights because it's in their own societies next to people who do believe in property rights. I mean, how you get there is I guess where I sort of just become skeptical, and the reason why I sort of oppose, not in principle, mandating certain economic systems. I oppose them just purely on the basis that it's not clear how much economic instability they would cause.
Right. The problem is, though, that when you have a class divide, so for example, in the workplace, let's say you had if you were to go like full pan-anarchism, let's say. So I call myself a pan-anarchist because I think there's legitimacy in voluntary communes, voluntary collectives, voluntary syndicates. But I think cooperatives and mutualistic economics is probably the best way forward. I'm not principally, like you, I'm not principally opposed to anarcho-communism, for example. I just think it's silly. But I don't apply that to anarcho-capitalism because, let's say there's a contradictory take on property ethics in the workplace. So the owners, they think their absentee property is justified, so they'll go to some firm who wants to enforce absentee property, and the workers will go to some firm who enforces usufruct property, and usually in the capitalist case it's for state. We have to take a side, don't we? Because there's a conflict.
Oh yeah. Okay. So right now, I would take a side with the non-squatter side is what I would take. Because right now all right.
Yeah. So the proprietor side.
Yeah, I would take the property owner side. I mean, one, because that's the law, and I think right now, property rights is pretty important to the stability of our society and to the economic system. I mean, I'm not gonna sort of want to exist as if property rights, aren't a thing just because I don't like them. I think there's a lot of things I don't like, and I'm just okay with it. I don't know if that it makes sense what I'm saying.
It kind of makes sense-ish. So to steal man you're saying that the system as a whole is worth preserving against minority occurrences of rejections of the principles it is founded on.
Yeah, I guess so. I would also add that I don't find anything inherently wrong with property rights. So if property rights is what we use in order to maintain economic stability and general well-being over like a state, then I'm perfectly fine with that. Now, if there are people who want to try different ways into, especially in the private sector, when it comes to the state sector, then I definitely do think that's where experiments are required, just because it's something that would be imposed on everyone. But in the private sector, you have more choice. Then I think if you can just sort of over time, run your mutualist experiments in the private sector, and it's sort of demonstrate that, hey, we have a model where we don't need property rights and we achieve better outcomes, and you sort of like take over the government, I guess it would be through the legislature, through the voter, and then sort of abolish property rights that way. I wouldn't be principally opposed to that either. I don't think. Of course, I'm thinking about it in terms of the United States, just because of the United States, sort of the political process is basically biased towards conservatism. So if you were to actually be able to get to a point where you had control of the legislature, where you were able to actually abolish property rights, it's highly likely that probably most of the population is pro-property rights. Against property rights. And in that case, I wouldn't bother. Yeah.
You seem to be drawing a hard line between economics and politics, which I wouldn't do personally, because I think the economics is is very much downwind of politics, right? So, it's to the point where economics is just wrapped up in politics. So if you say that I'm principally opposed to state authority because it's imposed on everyone, well, that's okay. I'm imposed on that. I'm against the states for that very reason, by the way. I don't believe in not imposing its will on everyone who doesn't want to be a part of that. But,
I'm not against state authority. All right, it came out that way. I'm definitely not against state authority.
Okay, you think state authority needs to be experimented on in order to legitimize its policies.
No, I think economic policy should be experimented on. That's sort of like what I think it should be. Is that how it necessarily is? No, but that's sort of how I want people to start looking at state policy. So instead of like right now we got sort of movements to sort of like increase the national minimum wage to 15. I'd probably say, well, okay, hold on a second. Let's sort of like look at certain states, increase the minimum wage there, see how it turns out, see what's good about it, see what's bad about it, and then we can sort of start expanding it that way. But that'd be my position. But the main reason why I use the word impose is because the state is authoritarian by its very nature, I think. But I see it as something that's just demonstrably necessary in order for the well-being of humanity. So yeah, and I also think it should be democratic, which is why I think if you're going to sort of like impose any kind of economic system through the state or economic policy to the state, it should probably be achieved democratically and should probably be experimental as well.
Yeah. So what you say? It has to be a democratic experimentation. So there's two points I'm going to make here. First off, it's not just going to be capitalism and mutualism which have to be experimented on. To hold this idea that capitalism is the best system for America today, we literally have to try every single conceivable system. And there's a difference between policy and system, right? So there's a difference between implementing the minimum wage and restoring the monarchy. You know what I mean? So, and property it kind of blurs the line. I understand that. It blurs the line between system and policy, because a policy of like defining property norms is, that has major upshots on the system. But capitalism as a system is very much based on that one single policy of property enforcement. My second point about that is, I mentioned it in my first lines, mutualism does not prevent workers from obeying the command on colleague, the command of one colleague, and voluntarily / democratically dedicating a disproportionate amount of their profits they produce towards his income, if they think that would be the best way of running the business. So, in fact, why not support workplace democracy and allow capitalistic hierarchical workplaces to voluntarily compete in the marketplace of ideas?
Oh yeah, well, I don't know if you remember from our last conversation, but I told you that I thought it was fine. Like people creating cooperatives, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I'm not opposed to cooperatives in principle. I don't even see them as anti-capitalist, honestly.
Yeah, I know that. But what I'm saying is, if a workplace just decided to just voted amongst themselves, saying, "Look, we want to get our boss out because I've looked at the numbers. We think he's a pain in the arse." I talked about the Hell's Kitchen. Not the Hell's Kitchen, the Hotel Nightmares or the Kitchen Nightmares or whatever they're called on Gordon Ramsay's show. Those examples. But because the owner legally has a property right to the restaurant or the cafe or the hotel, any decision made by the workforce based on their experiences is still denied to them by the state.
Yeah, I just, for me, that is a choice for them that they choose to sort of work there. Because, I mean, it partly, I guess for you think that people work, I guess, because I guess for
how far do we take this? How far do we take that standard of just move? Do we take it to states? Do we take it to planets?
Well, I would agree that right now, like, it's not super easy to move. Like, we should probably aim for economic policy that makes it much easier for people to move in as well, to have more competition in the market. That's how I would address that.
The idea of financial dependency on a capitalist already makes it pretty difficult to move. There's surplus labour.
That's why I think it's. All right, go ahead.
There's surplus labour, right? So, if you want to leave your job because you're not satisfied with the way it's run, then you're risking unemployment, and you necessarily risk unemployment because there's always a pool of unemployed labour to have a labour market exist. Yeah? So it's not really that much of an option.
I mean, if you didn't like the cooperative you're working in, you probably would. I mean, I guess we're saying that there's less unemployment in.
If you're in a cooperative, no, not necessarily. I'm not talking about employment rates. I'm talking about the control you have over your labour. Now, you've said before about the people working in the poorly run business. They voluntarily work there. It's on their own volition that they work in that place in the first place. Well, the alternative is move or leave the job, become unemployed, and potentially go work for another capitalist who arbitrates your standards of work. It's just choose your king, you know.
Yeah.
We don't take this. We don't apply this to the state level. We don't apply this to the state level. We say, "Oh, this policy in the United States is bad. Move to Mexico."
Oh yeah, well, probably because Mexico is like a totally different state under a different regulatory system, right?
Well, exactly. But you can if you don't like the US one, why don't you just choose a different one?
Well, isn't that the choice that you would have to make under mutualism anyway? Like, if you don't like the state, you either live in it or you have to move. Like, you're kind of stuck in the same situation.
I mean, if you're stuck in mutualism, at least you have control, or a much greater degree of control over your labour, over your workplace. So, as I said before, like, as far as it's decentralised as far as you can practically get. Like, with if you're insatisfied with your company, you can at least make an argument as to why things should be done differently and put it to the vote of the workers. You will also at least share similar interests of other workers around you. You can say to them, look, this company policy isn't doing us any favours. If it's not doing me any favours, it's not doing you any favours. That's why it's called mutualism, by the way. And you say, look, let's have a vote on it. If the vote doesn't go your way, then again, I'm not too sure what else can be done. What else I can do for workers in that case?
Yeah, well, that's
how
why
else I can help them.
That's why I think the best way to approach this is just through having options, like work options for people, make it easy for them to move as much as possible to find different jobs, have as much competition in the market, because that is the only way that you would actually solve the problem in both mutualism and capitalism, is make sure that people have enough choices or some sort of safety net where they could maybe switch to a different kind of career, do have education for another career as well, stuff like that.
I mean, hey, again, the option for mutualism to have a company where they say, hey, let's give a disproportionate amount of our wages to Jim and just listen to what Jim and just give all control to Jim. That option's there. That's how I'm describing a capitalist firm there. They can do that if they want to. All I'm saying is, as soon as they say this is shit, let's do something else, they should be allowed to.
Yeah, well, I agree. I mean, we're both kind of talking a little. To me, it sounds a little idealistic, but I sort of talk about like my idealistic view. It would be if somebody wanted to work in a cooperative, they could go and find one. If somebody wanted to work in a private firm, they could go work there. They could just go work wherever they want. I'm not principally opposed to private firms. I guess that's where we sort of defer. If somebody really needs to vote, if that's really important for them, then I guess I want an economic system that can provide that for them. But
because of the incentives inherent with capitalism, because of the incentives inherent with. Because of the economic financial incentives inherent to capitalism, capitalist firms are necessarily going to overwhelm the cooperative sector. That's always going to happen. Which is why I call for the abolition of absentee property.
Why would you say it's the case that that's always going to happen?
Because, as I said before, if you have investable capital, you're going to invest it in a way which is based on absentee property, which provides you, the investor, the maximum profit off the back of other people's work, or off the back of other people's labour.
Okay, I mean, if sort of like we all decide that we don't like the way things are going right now, or if capital is too concentrated, I don't see why we couldn't just vote for economic policy, to address that.
Well, I don't see why we can't just vote for a different boss.
Sure, I mean,
your system denies that from your system denies that from happening.
Well, I don't think it does. I just don't think people are as interested in cooperatives as you'd like them to be. I think that's the main difference. I mean, the problem with cooperatives is that if you want to start a cooperative, for one, you're sort of taking in risk in that enterprise. Whereas if you want to just go find a job from a capitalist, you're not really taking in any risk at all. You just sort of apply and you work and then you leave. You don't have to worry about any investment decisions. You don't have to worry about providing capital. You don't have to worry about having equity. I just think people tend to prefer non-cooperatives or starting non-cooperatives just because it's easier that way.
Hang on. Whoa.
Okay.
You just listed reasons why workers workers apparently choose to work for capitalist firms, and then you said that's why people create capitalist firms.
No, that's not why they create them. That's why workers don't. That's why we're not seeing more cooperatives. I think that's one of the reasons why we're not seeing more cooperatives. People just don't want to start.
We don't see cooperatives because, one, people don't know about cooperatives. You don't learn about cooperatives in school. Why don't you learn about cooperatives in school? Well, because it's not a national curriculum. Why is it not a national curriculum? Well, because capitalism is already the dominant form of production. Why is capitalism the dominant form of production? Well, because of the incentives provided by property enforcement.
Well, I mean, if you find any
it's a self-justifying hierarchy.
If you can find any ways where cooperatives are unfairly treated or unfairly marginalized or hindered from growth, I would agree with you that maybe. Okay. Well, what do you mean?
I think there are, but I don't need to. I don't need to go through that list. I don't think you
do either. I agree that there are. I think the fact that not enough people know about it, that's probably one big barrier to it, right? My point is that people are not choosing to start cooperatives. That's why we're not seeing as many. It sort of seems like you're saying it's something inherent to the system, but maybe there's sort of something where maybe there is some discrimination in terms of like lending, or maybe we need to increase education. Maybe there's some regulation that hinders cooperatives. I'm okay with addressing all these problems to make cooperatives easier for people to start them if they'd like to.
I'm seeing a wealth. I'm also saying they can start them if they'd like to. They can also expropriate them if they'd like to. But let's go back to the point here. One problem that workers have is that they don't have capital. Businesses are created by people with capital, and why do workers not have capital? Well, because capitalism necessarily concentrates wealth. It concentrates wealth because You invest in a firm, and that firm brings most of the profit back to the owner in the first place. Maybe not within the first 5 years or so, but it still does that anyway. Scales up, you end up with billionaires, owning pretty much everything.
Sure, yeah. Actually, for me, the one thing that's very important is that I think there's probably not the competition is too one-sided currently. I guess you would say it's too many billionaires. I honestly don't care if somebody's a billionaire or not, but it does seem like that. Yeah, it seems like there isn't. There's too much friction for people to be able to start their own business right now, and to me, that is the main problem. I don't think it's something that's inherent to capitalism. It just seems to be a problem right now with our current economic system here in America. When I look at other countries, like Nordic countries, or I mean, I guess that's kind of a meme, right? They're not socialist or anything, but I'm referring to those when I'm saying this. I'm looking at things like employee stock ownership plans, employee board membership, and even sovereign wealth funds, which are ways that you can provide capital to workers that does not require sort of like a expropriation of property rights, and it seems to provide pretty good results in terms of overall worker satisfaction and wealth inequality. So that's sort of the route that I think is just as fine to take. And I mean, you can look at all other countries and sort of see how that pans out in those countries.
Well, social democracy emerged as a response to the problems inherent with capitalism. And so most social democratic parties initially started out with the intention of abolishing capitalism altogether further down the line. But
so they probably decided not to, right?
They've ended up sticking with it because you can't do it. They've realised themselves that they can't just vote capitalism out of power, so they've just settled with, oh well, we'll just keep hold of this, and then we'll do all we can to, as I said before, run around this broken, fundamentally corrupted system with a bit of duct tape and hope it all stay together.
I just think you're taking for granted that people just don't want it the way you want it. You know what I mean? If people really wanted it, and we're talking some countries where they have something like 30-40% of the nation's wealth is sort of managed and is sort of spent in the public sector for things like like the wealth funds for safety nets and everything. They could presumably keep voting that infinitely higher until you have 100% government ownership, or they could even vote against property rights. But you're just not going to find people wanting this at all. It's just not something that's popular. And maybe you could say that it's something that's not well known enough, at which have at it. Let people know that you have this idea, that you have this cooperative idea, and that you want to expropriate property rights. And let's just sort of see how people react to it. And if that ends up being a priority of the voter base, I just don't think it will be. It doesn't seem to be. Anyway.
That's the plan, anyway. That is the plan. That's what this channel is doing. I mean, ThoughtBat. It's about spreading, first off, class consciousness, but I think we've pretty much done that. I think people understand the ideas of class consciousness. The second goal is to break the dichotomy between capitalism and communism, to make people understand that there's a third way alternative that's been out there since before the writings of Karl Marx, that being mutualism. And yeah, as you say, it is about word spreading, but that word spreading about mutualism, not about class consciousness. That is the next stage. That is what needs to be done. Although anarcho-communists can probably turn around and say, well, it's always the communists who get things done, and it's mutualists who just reap the rewards afterwards. Because as I said before, anarcho-communist societies always start off anarcho-communist, and then they end up going down this mutualist direction.
I just think some of the principles that, a lot of, I guess, is it fair for me to say you're a leftist?
Sorry, say that again.
Would it be fair for me to say you're a leftist?
I put myself on the left wing of politics here.
Okay, well, I'd say on the left wing of politics, when we're heading more towards mutualism, anti-property rights, I think, I just don't think that many people are as interested in these ideas as sort of like the left might think. What seems to be the case is that people just sort of want to live a life where they can have, general safety, general well-being, and they're not too concerned with sort of the concepts of property rights or the concept of private firms, right? They just want to be treated good at work. They want to feel like they're doing meaningful work. They want to feel like they can look forward to the future, like they can spend time with their children, like they can have meaningful work. They can have free creative expression, and so that's what matters to me as well. Because I'm honestly concerned with what other people want. So if other people just, through the process of your advocacy, decide that they don't want property rights, and we can maintain this, or even a better way of life than we have right now, then have at it. But for one, I don't think it's demonstrably the case that mutualism will necessarily lead to that. But two, it just doesn't even seem like people want it.
Do you think the Democratic Republic of Korea, the People's Democratic Republic of Korea, is a good system?
No, I understand where you're heading. I'm guessing you're going to say that the people think they want it.
Yeah, so I'm saying that people are very much ideologically influenced by the powers that be. It's just, I mean, Proudhon pointed this out again. Oh, sorry, was it Proudhon? No, it was Stirner. Stirner pointed out about a point about nationalism. The nationalists or the conservatives would always point to the consent, the consent of the masses, and saying, look how everyone just so happens to love our system. Well, is it really that much of a coincidence that the British liked the British state, the British Empire back in the day? Or is it really that much of a coincidence that the Turks loved the Ottoman Empire, or that the Emirati citizens love the UAE, or that the Chinese people have a high approval rating of their own government? It's not, because pretty much there's a process called, Harry Chartier calls ideological colonization. And it sounds a bit more conspiracy theory than it actually is. All it is that the powers that be, who pretty much shape the education system, they shape media, they shape pretty much any. Also the news outlets, they have a massive influence on people's opinions. That's the origin of conservatism. Is just people just stepping out the door, looking at the world around them, saying, "Oh, this is good." That's it. You're not thinking about it. You're not thinking about what you want or what's good or what anything of the sort. And people do the thinking, and the people turn around and say, "Well, we don't want that." Oh, so what? Have you thought about it?
Yeah, I think it's very important they say, "Have you thought about it?" Which is why I don't think you've ever heard me say that we should not that we should try to keep information about mutualism away from people. The problem with North Korea and even China, for me at least, is that in order to have agency, it means you have to be able to be able to make a choice from the broadest set of choices as possible, and that necessarily requires information. In the case of North Korea and China, I mean, I'm pretty sure we're all aware here that they essentially try to conceal as much information from them as possible. But on top of that, I think there's a lot of indoctrination that happens while they're growing up as well. Like I don't mind teaching in schools. Hey, there is this alternative of mutualism. Like if there's a state that wants to do that, and sort of letting children know that hey, there is this choice, or even letting adults know that there are these choices, because that's really important. Which is why I honestly, I don't
agree that that's not there right now, don't you?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So how can you say then that people don't want mutualism?
Well, because they don't want it. I mean, whether or not they know that they would want it otherwise.
So what does that mean? What does that mean? What value does that observation have when you acknowledge that the education just isn't there yet, and my job hasn't been done yet?
Well, because you're saying it's inherent to capitalism. So when I say that people don't want it, then we can say, okay, well, they don't want it because they don't know. So maybe we should probably let them know. That's
why would the state put mutualism on its national curriculum?
Because the state is democratically elected. The government is democratically elected. If they would represent their voter base. That's how usually works.
The majority.
At least in America.
The majority, for that to happen, the majority of people would need to be sympathetic to mutualism in the first place.
It's actually not even the majority. I'm pretty sure, especially when it comes to local elections, you're looking at probably very small margins, not even close to half.
If I'm steel manning liberal democracy, you'll need you need a lot of, I'll say, considerable amount of people in the United States to get those policies forward.
Yeah, you probably would, but I mean that's just the way. I think it's fine. Like we're talking about sort of broad economic prescriptions for people that you probably need some sort of democratic input for that, right?
So you see how we're falling back into this paradox of the people don't want it because they don't know about it. So we'll wait for the people to vote for it so that they can know about it.
Well, no, but that's why I'm saying
it's a silly standard, isn't it?
No, that's why
it's a very silly standard.
Well, it's not silly because that's what activism is. Like that's just the history of activism throughout the entire history of the United States. People usually don't want it, and then they're made aware of it, and they're like, "Oh shit, we want it," and then that puts pressure on the state, and then they change economic. I mean, that's how it works in America.
It's not how it works in America. I mean, the civil rights movement was a classic example of the state being held to ransom by violent civil rights protesters, and the state effectively giving in. It wasn't done by some rational conversation done on the public sphere.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Suddenly, they all voted it away.
For me, that's part of the that's part of sort of like the democratic process as well. Like I don't think voting is one way, but you also have sort of like, I guess you would call it direct action. So things like labor strikes, what do you say, protesting,
expropriation.
What's expropriation? Labor strikes, expropriation,
seizing property.
I guess that's kind of or something like I don't know if you're familiar with what was called the Chaz here in the United States, where I think it was Seattle, a group of.
I was interested in it. Yeah, it failed for several reasons. Yeah.
I mean, it's just never gonna succeed. People don't people
It
aren't
succeeded.
able to do that.
It has succeeded. Christianity still exists. It's been existing since the 70s.
Well,
They did exactly what Chaz did, and they're still going. I've been there. It's quite nice.
liberalized? Are they not liberalized at all?
No, they're still a mutualist economy. It's still an anarchist society within the middle of Copenhagen. What Chaz didn't do was become self-sufficient. They were terrible at it. They just treated it as some great big party and then wondered why it all collapsed. They were absolute idiots in Chaz. I was excited about that movement. I wanted other similar movements to pop up all over the United States, but Chaz gave the exact example of how not to do it. I'm not angry at you. I'm angry at Chaz. They're just thinking about it, how idiotic they were.
Yeah.
So a week in, they're still giving out free pizzas. What the hell are you doing?
Okay. So for me, in terms of expropriation, because obviously, if I believe in the American system, then I'm okay with expropriation to some extent because of the American Revolution, right? So I think, I guess I would have to draw a line if it was something that was not broadly supported by the population within an area. If it was something that ended up being broadly supported, and it was just something that was essentially being denied the people because of the nature, maybe, I guess you could say, the governmental system, then it just seems like I don't know what percentage it would have to be. I guess we could, that's probably details that we don't really need to talk about. But yeah, I agree that at some point, if the government is not responding to the citizenry and the population to give them what they need and what they want, that it's probably fine for the population to sort of like begin to try to expropriate, I guess, whatever they would need to achieve what they want. I mean, you have to get them to want that first. Like it's sort of the same with the American Revolution. I mean, I guess I don't really have to talk about like the vast amount of expropriation that happened there.
The American Revolution, by the way, wasn't done like a majoritarian movement. It was done by a minority of revolutionaries. So was the Russian Revolution, by the way. So all revolutions in history are done by a minority party who just are more willing to act than the rest, I suppose. Like, it wasn't like a majority vote in favour of the revolution.
Well, I guess that does get muddy. I would agree. Like, it's probably not clear cut at what point expropriation is okay. I know at some point it does seem to be okay.
It's why what the population want doesn't really matter to me. I care more about the ideas and the and whether or not they're consistent. Like,
that's just where we would like greatly disagree, because I think you should probably get the population to know what the options are, and instead of like making them choose something. You know, obviously whatever they live in right now is forced already, which is why we should probably expand knowledge on all kinds of any kind of possibility that they could have of a life.
We've gone from principle conservatism to now just principle populism, where as long as the majority want it, it's great. Like, don't make me bring the Nazis up, Al. Come on.
No, it's not necessarily that that it's good. It's just that I think like if I would agree with it, obviously, but if there just has to be a point where expropriation is fine. No.
There is a point where expropriation is fine. I do agree, but I'm not going to denounce people who expropriate absentee property for themselves just because the rest of the country don't like the idea of mutualism.
Okay, yeah. I mean, like, obviously there are some reasons to expropriate that are fine and others not. Like, if you were to have basically every white person in America decide to expropriate them minority black people, like, obviously I wouldn't support that. But we're just talking about sort of like mutualism, which I don't have any principal objection to. You know, I don't find anything wrong with mutualism or cooperatives in principally wrong. If that's what sort of the majority of the population wants and they're willing to fight for it, like, I probably wouldn't be part of that fight though, because I don't really care about politics like that.
Can I put a hypothetical to you? Say America, say a new fascist party in America outshone the Democrats and the Republicans, and they won by a massive majority. And then there's resistance movements in America who are pro-liberal democracy, pro what America is today. And part of their movement was forcible expropriation of corporations which are tied up to the state. Or expropriation of government buildings and things like that, airfields, bases, effectively breaking the law which is endorsed by the rest of the population. Would you denounce that because the population are mostly against it, or would you go back to well, the ideas are what's important here, not majority opinion.
Are you saying that the government was fascist?
Yeah, so if the government went in the direction that you don't like, but the rest of the population did like it, would you be against any kind of violence made against that government?
Probably not, but that's just because I have an objection, like a specific objection to fascism.
Right.
So that's what I mean is that if I sort of have a specific objection to the way government's operating, I don't have a moral objection to property rights, but I also don't have. I'm also not tied to it. Sure, could you explain to me how I'm flip flopping?
But you're flip flopping a lot because before you said you're against mutualist forcible expropriation because it's illegal and because the majority of the United States want it to be illegal. So you're against that. You want us to compete on the marketplace of ideas and become mutualist democratically, properly. But if it went the other way, if democracy decided that fascism was best and then all the people approved fascism, now you're suddenly going, oh, well, it's the idea that's important. It's fighting for the idea, not the popular will. You can't have it both ways, Sunshine.
Well, I'm not trying to have it both ways. Some ideas I'm principally against. Some ideas I'm not. So fascism is one that I'd be principally against. And so I'm perfectly okay with. Well, because I think people should have one knowledge and choice and more control over their own lives. Like when it comes to deciding what they want.
What if you want full knowledge? I have full knowledge of fascism, and so does everyone else. We all understand fascism, and we compare it to present day. We all vote for it. We want this is the last referendum. It's gone. What's your principled objection?
Okay, are we sort of like maintaining all the well-being, like status, and everything? Like, are we basically having like is this like a fascist country that just sort of has better outcomes than anything else, basically?
I could point to fascist Spain and how that had good economic outputs, yeah.
Well, it's not just economic outputs. Like, I'm concerned with people feeling like they have some sort of like liberty. Are you telling me that this is like a fascist country that sort of would meet my standard of well-being that I want and agency that I want? Is what you're saying better than basically any other economic system? That seems to be the situation you're getting.
I think it's definitely possible for a fascistic government to provide particular positive outcomes. They need to, by the way, in order to like maintain their legitimacy on power. Like if Nazi Germany was just shit for everyone, they wouldn't exist. It wouldn't last very long.
Well, if this just achieves better outcomes than anything else, like, obviously, I'm okay with that. In the same sense, if you were to demonstrate that sort of like that God was real, then obviously I would have to choose sort of like a religious theocracy because I wouldn't want people to burn in hell for eternity, right?
Yeah, but I just feel like your approach and your method of thinking about politics doesn't lead us to any decisive conclusions, and I don't think it adequately even leads us to the conclusion that you arrive at.
Well, I think so. I could even give you some policy conclusions that it leads me to, if you'd like me to.
Okay. Go on.
So for one, I think that one of the reasons because I value agency and choice. One thing that I think is very important is for people to able to have emotional control. And what I mean specifically is to be sort of like have self-awareness over emotions. And so I think we should probably endorse some sort of like a mindfulness education in sort of like pre-K. Another thing that I think we need to have is we probably need to have some form of unemployment, like robust unemployment security, to make sure that people can go from job to job and quit jobs if they absolutely need to. We probably need to improve some labor laws. Some labor law that I like from other countries that we don't have here. One would be the right to disconnect, I think, because sort of forcing employees to maintain, work after when they're supposed to be having the day off. I think that's bad. Maybe like a 30 day 30-day mandatory paid leave would be nice. Let's see what else. I don't know. I could keep naming more if you'd like me to.
Well, I disagree with the first one. Like the idea of having mindfulness sessions. I think, in my ironic Minecraft opinion, that's a terrible idea. I think children should be taught to suck it up and just get on with it. And that provides good outcomes as it did for hundreds and hundreds of years, and that's how we're done now. What evidence have you got to say that these mindfulness sessions are going to improve their lives at all?
Yeah. Give me a second. I can provide study things. Okay. I mean, I'm just Googling things real quick. Here, I can just provide something real quick. Let me find out.
If you put it up in VC text, I can put it on the page for people to
I don't
read
I
it.
don't I don't know. I don't know how reliable this is, but I'm just gonna post something.
Actually, I disagree as well.
Something.
Another good thing, I can provide sources just to point to how investing in youth centres also increases, also boosts child mental health.
Yeah, I think that'd be good too. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but we've only got so much resources, so
Yeah, that's why economics is
let's
important.
invest in one or the other.
But that's why economics is important, because economics is concerned with sort of like the allocation of scarce resources, which is why you see me take such a strong economic stance, because I understand that there may be some things we'd like to do, but that given the scarce allocation of resources and sort of like the complexity of supply chains, that we sort of need to make a decision that's more based on practicality that may not give everybody everything they want, which is why I'm so focused on the economic argument as well.
Right, but the point of my kind of thought experiment, my ironic behaviour was effectively just saying, well, look, you've got to be able to find evidence for all kinds of different ways to improve a particular thing. But you need, I'm stressing to you now, you need to have a, not idealistic, but a rigid ideology behind it. I don't think you just seem to say, oh, well, what produces nice outcomes? This might produce nice outcomes. This might produce nice outcomes. This policy might.
What's nice outcomes?
And the reality is, there's multiple ways of doing it. Without the ideology behind it, you haven't got what's the word? Any real direction.
Well, I mean, the direction would be obviously anything that's valuable to me, and so I think sort of value expression is very complicated, because I think it requires a very a strong knowledge of yourself, and it requires constant updating of sort of how you view the world and what you want to see in the world, and sometimes you're going to make a bad decision. So yeah, it's very complicated, and you're probably going to need to constantly be looking at the outcomes of actions and see whether or not you actually want to continue doing them. That just seems very intuitive for me. It's not clear to me that I know everything of how everything should be right now. I sort of got to look at how I want things to be, if that makes sense. How sort of reach the outcomes that I want, and then sort of slowly work my way towards that. And I guess this is a mentality I get from sort of like my career, which is in innovation, in technological innovation. And I'm very used to the idea of experimenting, creating new ideas, especially new practical, profitable ideas. But you have to sort of start. You have to start with sort of like, I want to accomplish something, and then you have to sort of experiment your way, slowly get there. And then sometimes what you end up finding out is that, well, actually, this is not a good approach. I find that this sort of like a higher yield to best express what I'm trying to accomplish if I change what I'm doing, if that makes sense. So I don't consider that flip-flopping. I think I'm very open to experimenting and trying different ways to accomplish things, which is why I don't necessarily oppose sort of mutualism principally. I don't even think I oppose many things principally, other than sort of like torture, enslavement, and all that.
Well, why not? Why not torture?
Because I value people's agency and sort of like well-being. That's why.
Well, what if there was a bomb and you need to know where that bomb was, and then the prisoner wouldn't tell you where the bomb was unless you tortured him? And if you said, right, if you give us the wrong thing, we're going to torture you even more and even worse. Aren't you in favour of people's welfare? Well, I'm proposing utilitarianism to you. I'm using a utilitarian framework, and you necessarily, if you want to object to that, is to appeal to some kind of natural rights framework. That's why frameworks are important.
I don't believe in natural rights or anything. I sort of think that what's valuable is independent to every single person. I couldn't say what's valuable for somebody else or what should be valuable for somebody else. That doesn't seem to make sense in my mind.
What I'm saying is, to work out what the good is, you need to be able to say, you need more than to say, I want good things to happen or good results to happen. You need to be able to define the good. You need to be able to define.
Okay, so you want to say?
I sound like Neolibruh. You need to be able to define those things and come up with a system that fits in with those principles themselves. I just don't think capitalism fits a principle in the first place.
Well, yeah, obviously, I want to say right now it's not really maximizing the principles that I like anyway. But that's why I propose sort of like policy that moves towards it. I guess so. Do you want me to define what I think is good?
I want to know where how you define. I want to know your ethical framework. Utilitarianism.
Okay, this is gonna sound stupid. I was pretty sold on what my ethical framework was until a few months ago. I had a brain blast and I started experimenting, just thinking more about like awareness. But I guess the shortest way that I would say it is that I think that when it comes, sort of what I think is good, right? The outcomes that I want to achieve for everyone is a in the moment, present feeling of sort of being able to enjoy and experience what you're currently doing without without what I would consider anxiety for the future, anxiety of the past, or anxiety of the present. And so this is sort of the state of mind that I would like to instill for everyone, because it's not really dependent on the valid expression of my valid expression. This state, it depends on the valid expression of every single individual, if that makes sense. But of course, there are some things that I value so much that it would be impossible for me to achieve this state of mind. Does that make sense? And so these are the times where I believe it's important to take action. I could elaborate a little bit more, but it might sound a little kooky.
So let me just repeat it back. You're in favor of minimizing or eradicating anxiety, past, present, and future.
Yeah. That'd be like a super
in yourself or in humanity in general.
And as many people as possible. But obviously, there might be some people who are sort of so tied to the what's it called, to the idea of like wanting to rape and murder that they couldn't possibly ever reach this state.
Yeah, there's conflicting interests.
Yeah, so then I would probably want to stop them.
So where do those conflicting interests come from, economically speaking?
Economically speaking,
conflicting interests. Where do conflicting? Where do let's say non-mutualist relationships come from?
Sorry, could you explain that? My philosophy is really bad, so I'm kind of like doing this ad hoc, just so you know.
I'm kind of playing with you a bit. I'm pretty much saying, look, you understand that not everyone's interests can necessarily be satisfied due to particular aspects about their nature. So we understand that there's a clash of interests. So now I've asked you to apply that on the economics arena, where you have conflicting interests between classes. You have conflicting interests within the workplace between the capitalist and between the worker. The workers have anxiety for their job security and for their wages, paying off the bills, those kinds of things. The capitalist has their own anxiety of keeping the workers in check, making sure his profits are the maximum, and these come into conflict with one another. Okay.
Yeah. That's why I think they're best resolved through a democratic state, like liberal democracy, because that's what the economic policy would be. Or I mean, it could also be through like you said, direct action or something.
Okay. So we acknowledge there's a problem. We acknowledge there's a problem in class conflict. That's good. But the solution, I don't think it's through democracy, through liberal democracy, for a whole host of reasons. One of them being, it sounds like I'm going back in circles, but one of them being this idea of ideological colonization. And it's a long mouthful of word, but I haven't really come up with a term that's better than it. It's basically whereby the people who are the most influential in the state, or in the runnings of a state, and the runnings of our daily life, so that being effectively the people who are made wealthy through capitalism and their chums in the government, they are the ones who control the media, they are the ones who control state policy, control educational curriculums, and that's why I'm saying liberal democracy as a means of solving problems is incredibly deficient. That's why
we just disagree on that. Then that's where we just disagree too.
Okay, we can disagree, and this is I guess we do disagree. This is my argument, and that is why riots happen. That's why strikes happen all the time. Workplace disputes can't be solved through liberal democracy because it doesn't concern itself with workplace disputes. It just doesn't. Like I don't go to my MP if my boss has committed wage theft, or if my boss has treated me in a way which I think is unfair. I can't solve that through the state. That's why strikes happen. That's why unions exist. That's why, and when strikes happen, consumers get annoyed.
Strikes against the private sector.
Yeah, but you can't separate politics and you can't separate politics and economics. There's a reason why, by the way, Marx, Proudhon, and the rest of it didn't call it capitalism as per se. They called it political economy because the economy is so wrapped up into the political system. It's just called political economy. They're one of the same almost. Yes, strikes happen against the private sector, but the trains, for example, a train strike. Train workers go on strike, the trains don't run. Consumers get pissed off. People who ride the trains to go to work or go to see family or rest, they get pissed off. They call on the state to suppress workers, to suppress unions.
Obviously, I would be against that kind of policy.
You're against it, right? You're against it, but
yes.
But I'm saying the problems aren't solved through the state. They can't be solved through the state.
I think they can. Well, okay. So hold on. Let me. Last time this is where we talk past each other a little bit. I think that a lot of problems can be solved through the state, probably most. But it's also the case that there's also probably some faster ways that you could do it through sort of like what I would call the private sector, which I know you said there's not a difference. So, for example, you could probably try to push legislation. If that's not good enough, then maybe you form a union, and then maybe you advocate for what you want that way as well. There's just different ways for people to resolve the conflicts that you're describing. There's just so many different ways to do it. The state is one really big way, which sort of like resolves conflicts at a broader level. But when it comes to a more local level, you have strikes, you have protests, you've got a bunch of different ways.
The state doesn't resolve problems; it just suppresses them. So it suppresses its symptoms. Because again,
if you see it that way, that's fine.
The general population who are upset with train strikes aren't aware necessarily of the intricacies of the labour disputes going on with the train sector. All they see is the trains aren't working, people are on strike. We need to stop this, and so their favourite politicians come in and they legislate against it in some way or another. Or so they might be sympathetic to the workers, so they'll hire a more liberal candidate who will demand a minimum wage. Well, there's still conflicts in the workplace. There's still conflicts in the company between the owners and the labourers. That hasn't been solved. You've just mediated.
There's always going to be conflict, though. There's always going to be conflict. That's something that's just unavoidable.
No, it's not. Because
so everybody just agrees under mutualism. Is that the idea?
No, not so. I'm saying mutualism is not utopian, but it is the harmonization of interests. That's why it's called mutualism. It's mutual self-interest. That's what it's based on. It's based on attaining mutual self-interest within the economy. Markets are already based on mutual self-interest, but there exists conflicting interests within the way markets operate. So capitalism, absentee property.
You said you wanted to advocate for that, but that's fine. If you do advocate for it, you convince people, and it turns out that is the case, if that's just how it ends up being, fine. If that's just a better way to run than sort of having a state or whatever, then fine. Let's see what happens, but you got to get there first.
Yeah, no, but what I've got to do is we're going back in circles. What I've got to do is try and proactively try and convince people to be mutualists. And when you say, well, you go ahead and do that, but I'm still going to be against you, kind of anyway, principally. Not principally.
No, I'm not against principally on it. I'm not against anything. I'm not against principally on anything about mutualism. Like I said previously, the only reason why I wouldn't want a sort of like a broad, which I know you don't advocate for, the reason why I don't want a broad co-op mandate is because I'm not sure that it wouldn't create instability in the economic system, which is necessary to maintain sort of like tax revenue for the state, to support the welfare state, to support the military, to support infrastructure and all that. That's why I said, I don't oppose the mutualism on principle. That's what I'm saying. If you go for it, like if you and a bunch of people are able to make this happen, and then you sort of prove to everybody that, hey, this is better than having a government, like, congratulations. I think everybody's going to want to join that, but you got to do that. You got to actually do that.
Yeah, but again, as soon as we start expropriating capitalists and taking problems into our own hands and solving them for ourselves and ours, mutualists, you'll object to it and you'll just support state suppression of it and put us in prison. That's what happens.
Well, it depends. I mean, like, if I already gave you a scenario, so I'm going to try to clarify. You gave an example where you had a state, the liberal democracy, that was not responsive whatsoever to the voter base when it came to installing mutualism, right? So we're talking about, and I'm going to use the American system, for example. We're talking about congressmen, senators that do not represent their voter base at all, that it's just impossible for it to happen, and that when the broad population is sort of constantly voting in politicians to establish mutualism, when that just cannot happen because, I guess, for whatever reason, which I really don't think is the case, then of course it's okay to start expropriating because you have a government that's not responsive to the citizens.
I'm saying that with regards to my critique of electoralism, it's because you can't get that majority consent in the first place for it to happen. You just can't get it. Revolutions and major advancements in political progress are done by minorities. They're always done by minorities, all the time. It's never done by a majority. Civil rights movement was done by quite a small minority of people.
No, I understand that, but I'm not principally opposed to property rights in private firms. So I don't think it's fine to just sort of like take a minority amount of people and overthrow the government and establish whatever you want. I don't think that's okay because I'm not principally opposed to the system right now. I think there are changes that need to be done, but I have no principal
objection. You're
principally
in favor of it. You're principally in favor of it. And that's where we disagree. That's where we do disagree.
Like I said, if you find something better, like go ahead and replace it.
Because you'll say, I'm not opposed to mutualism in principle. I'm not opposed to this either. But as soon as people start doing mutualism, ignoring the rest of what the country decides to say, as in expropriation, you say, you should have just convinced the whole country to go mutualist before you expropriated this property. If the state expropriates a property on your behalf, then it's fine for some reason. Why is it okay for the state to do it, but not for the individual to do it?
Same reason why it's okay for the state to tax people and not for individuals to tax others, right? Like
no, it's not. No, it's not.
I think it's okay.
Not okay.
Well, you don't think you don't think it's okay?
Taxation is theft. Yeah, taxation is theft. Yes.
I would disagree. I disagree with that.
Well, how can you disagree with that? It's the forcible expropriation of one's income.
Yeah, well, I think it's not like income happens in a vacuum. Usually, income happens in the context of like a broader economic system. And when you participate in the economic system, you're sort of like you're subject to the rules and regulations of it, of course, but you also get benefits from it. So in the case of, like I said, I can only use the American system. Is you get the benefit of having a military to protect you. You get the benefit of having a police station, a fire station, infrastructure. Let's see what else. Welfare benefits, stuff like that. And that's sort of the trade-off.
How is this different from protection money from criminal gangs?
Let me think. I guess you could probably make a comparison. You could probably make that comparison.
I make a very distinctive comparison. The difference between a criminal gang extracting protection money from you is
actually, I don't think that's probably. I don't really think that's probably the same. I think probably a more apt comparison would be if you sort of establish in sort of like, let's say you had a couple thousand people out in the desert, you form different groups, and then they sort of find that they need to sort of like put resources together. And necessarily part of putting resources together is to have some sort of quota on what people are able to gather. And so they use that quota to gather resources, and then they can sort of, I don't know, I guess, begin implementing some form of infrastructure, protection, safety. I think that's probably more correct, because the whole idea with protection money and gangsters is that they're not actually protecting you. It's sort of a threat where you're not really getting anything out of this. They just sort of promise not to beat you up, basically. So yeah, I don't actually think
taxation.
Well, I just explained to you the difference.
No. You said the state provides some services. So do gangsters, by the way. So do gangs. They provide protection, from other criminal gangs, I guess, from other states maybe. And gangsters do so at threat of violence. Well, so is taxation.
Yeah, well, I'll also give you the example about.
Don't pay your taxes. Tell me what happens.
Well, I go to jail, and I probably should go to jail. And I should go to jail.
Right, so now it's a moral conviction. Now it's a moral statement that you should pay taxes.
Yeah, because if nobody paid taxes, into it? Because if nobody paid taxes, then we'd ruin the economy. We'd probably destroy infrastructure. We would destroy our military. We wouldn't have any way to fund fire stations, police stations. This is why I'm saying that the comparison is not a good comparison. A better comparison would be the one that I gave you just previously, where you have a group of people in the desert that sort of decide to pool their resources together. Naturally, they're going to start having children, and those children are going to be part of that system as well. And that's going to entail sort of some way of bringing productivity of everyone together. If you just sort of said, hey, nobody actually has to contribute to the group, then there's probably going to be another group who's actually established some form of society that's going to come in and take you over. Like, this is not the same as like a protection money for a gang. This is totally different.
Taxationless societies are possible, and they have happened.
I'm sure they have, but the one problem that I have is that I don't think there's been any taxationless society, that has been able to sort of secure the kind of liberty and security that sort of stated societies have. Usually these countries get taken over or something, don't they?
Well, countries with taxation normally get taken over, so what?
Yeah. Well, I know, but what I'm saying is that sort of when you take a country like the United States, right? Like right now, what I think is very important is to be like for a state is you need groups of people to be able to defend themselves from external threats. When that could be,
this
probably
argument,
other societies as well.
This argument about aggression is necessary for protection does apply to colonial empires, by the way.
All right, I didn't say anything about aggression. I just think you need a strong military, at the very least.
Aggression, like taxation, is a form of aggression.
Oh, sure. In that sense, then yeah, that'd be one form of aggression. That's probably fine.
So how is this logically different to the justifications given for the existence or the expansion even of the British Empire? If we don't have an empire, France will have an empire, and they'll take us over.
Well, I didn't say anything about imperialism. I'm just saying that in order to have
notice, young liberal, all these countries that don't have empires and don't have slavery, they are considerably weaker than us, and we can take them over. And they often do get taken over by the Germans and the Austrians and the French and all the rest of it. It's the same arguments anarchists have been banging their heads against the wall for 200 years.
So I guess I gotta ask you. So you're perfectly okay establishing a society that is incapable of defending itself from external threats, right? Like
I don't want it to be incapable of defending itself.
Okay.
Anarchist societies have been capable of defending themselves,
but not like the United States, right? Or like England.
The United States has an empire. It engages in imperialism. Chomsky has done quite a lot of work to expose it. The United States
I really like
foreign
Chomsky,
policy is frankly disgusting.
Yeah, but you probably, if you're going to stand up against the United States, you probably want a strong military. And when you're looking at militaries that can even they even matter when it comes to sort of like global, I guess competition.
Now you're making tanky arguments. Now you're making tanky arguments.
Sure, could you explain that? Could you elaborate on that?
This is what Marxist Leninists say to anarchists. It's like, the USA is powerful. We need to be even more authoritarian than them to protect ourselves. Come on.
Well, I'm not talking about authoritarian, man. I'm talking about when you have a society, you probably want to establish some system of bringing together resources in order to be able to maintain personal safety and security from external threats. And it seems like establishing a state is one way to do it. Now, I gave you the example where you have a group of people in the desert that put their resources together, and part of that is necessarily requiring that every member of the society, I guess you could say not donates, but it's taxed, right? And the people who are born in it are not going to have a choice, and they're going to get taxed too. But you know what? That's probably okay because at least they're able to maintain stability and long-term security. Now, I didn't say anything about imperialism. I didn't say anything about building empires. I didn't say none of that.
No, because I didn't say you said anything about empires. I'm just saying this logic.
We're saying my logic leads to how does it extend to that? Can you just explain to me sort of like the logical steps that extend that way?
Okay. So first off, you're saying taxation is fine because aggression is necessary or force is necessary to maintain the protection of a society against other external threats.
Sure, but just to be clear, you're the one calling it taxation aggression, right?
Oh, it is aggression.
Okay. What would you say that? Is there no taxation in
Neolib, give me $20 or I'll put you in a cage. Okay. Is that not aggressive? Is that not aggression?
Sure, that's what I'm saying. If you're calling that aggression, then I'm okay with that being aggression then. But you also got to understand that this is very different from sort of the aggression where I'm part of a society and I'm under threat of sort of giving some productivity to sort of establish and maintain the broader society. Is very different from you threatening to throw me in a cage and giving me money. I'm not getting anything out of this. It doesn't establish any long-term safety for anybody. You're just sort of like taking money away from me. That's a huge difference.
I give you an iPhone as well.
Well, I don't want
that. Well, sucks to be you, because it's your civic duty. It's your moral obligation to pay the taxes.
iPhone for $20 is a good deal. Guys, you are going for hour and 15 minutes, so do you want to continue or do you want Q&A or I don't know how much time you have?
We can start to wrap this up, but the idea that you get things, or I don't want to pay for the public library. I don't want to pay for some iced over road in Scotland that nobody fucking uses. I don't want to pay for, let's say, a foreign war in Afghanistan or a foreign war in Iraq. I don't want to pay for those things. But tough, says the government.
I don't know what to tell you. Like, I think it's very important for societies to be able to like withstand external threats and security. I mean, it sucks. Like, it sucks that it's that way. It sucks that it's that way, but that's just the way it is. I mean, people are violent.
It doesn't have to be done. It doesn't have to be done through.
I'll tell you what. If you can figure out how to do it, and you establish a system that's better than anything we've got now, I'm all for it, man. Because then that means that anybody can do anything they want and do whatever they want at any point in time. Well, if you can sort of do that, and then you're fully secure from any external threat. And I mean, you're basically just saying you're fine the same.
Yeah, you're saying all that. As long as we adhere to the laws established by your capitalist dictatorship, your capitalist quote-unquote democracy. As soon as we go outside those laws set by your capitalist dictatorship, and if that's what it effectively is, we go to prison.
Well, and it's not every law, because I did say that I was okay with direct action, didn't I? Like, and also, look, because the alternative that you're telling me is that we just ignore sort of like any democratic decision, and we just sort of impose what we want on everybody else. That's like the
sounds
alternative.
Good to me, pal. Sounds absolutely fantastic to me. Yeah.
Yeah. I understand that, but I'm just saying that I would prefer not to. That's all I'm saying.
I'm saying, is the idea right or wrong? I don't care if the rest of the people agree.
Sure, and I don't have any principal objection to private firms or private property. So I don't have any moral inclination to expropriate anything from anybody right now.
Yeah, no, but I think as we've proven, your argument for it is just circular.
I guess maybe somebody could.
I think both argument is starting to go into circles. So I know that you have to go, Bet. So if you can go closing statements and Q&A, so we can wrap this up.
So closing statement from me. I still believe that neoliberals' position is both paradoxical and circular. The reason why it's paradoxical is because he prescribes mutualism. Well, he foists the responsibility of mutualism to prove itself through government-run experimentations, through adhering to the rules and laws set by capitalist bureaucracies to implement itself. Things are institutions which are set up to preserve capitalism and to preserve the people's positions in power. He's telling us to live by that. When we're saying the whole thing fundamentally is flawed, and we need to act outside of it, in contradiction to it, and i.e. through expropriation, i.e. through tax abstention. I didn't really talk about that too much. We just talked about taxes. But through that kind of activism, that is needed to establish mutualism, not hoping that the American government will do it all for us. It is circular because if you're saying, well, let's have mutualism compete with capitalism, well, capitalism itself is a system which reproduces itself. It reproduces itself because through property enforcement itself, it provides investors with an avenue to enriching themselves off the back of other people's labour. You can't get out of that through any other means other than expropriation. Expropriation is a massive part of getting out of mutualism. But as long as I can't do that, then you're holding circular positions. You just seem to hold the position that this is good. This is good because the state says so, and because it's law.
No, not exactly, but okay.
Okay, now your closing statement, and then we'll go to questions.
I guess I start off that it's not. So if I were to try to explain my position a little bit better, maybe I'm not good, or maybe somebody can tell me if if they agree that my position is circular and can maybe explain it to me, maybe in terms that I understand a little bit better. But the difference that I think between Bat and I is that I don't think. At least not in America, that our democracy is as captive to the capitalist as he would, right? We know that politicians spend a lot of money trying to keep track of public opinion, and that we also know that when you look at the voter bases in different counties, in different states, in different regions, that we see economic policy that's that reflective of that voter base, right? Also, one of the problems with the United States, well, it's not really a problem. I guess you could say it's a feature, is that you don't have individual senators representing the interest of the entire population. They represent their state. Congressmen represent their local position. So when you have broad polls about public opinion, you probably shouldn't expect them to reflect what policy is actually being passed. What you actually want to do is you want to look, what is the voter base of each politician? What do they want? And then that's how you determine whether or not it's responsive. Now, you may not like that. You may say, well, that's too limited, and that's fine. We can talk about ways to improve the political system. I think there are some ways. For example, one would be ranked choice voting. Another one would be to improve the way districts are drawn. But I'm not going to get too much into detail of that. So that's one thing that I think is the difference between us. I don't think our democracy is completely flawed, and I do think it's improved. The big difference is that voters just don't want to establish mutualism. There are probably different reasons why. One of the reasons could just be that they just don't know. Okay, well, let's start finding ways to teach the voter base about it, and then we can start seeing how their opinions change over time, and then you will see a government that's responsive to that.
Okay. Thank you both. Now we will go with questions. I will, because there's very few people, I will just unmute everybody. So, do you have any questions, Mr. Cuddles?
I guess not really. I think both points were already sort of explained. Neil, I think the main point though, it's sort of interesting, I guess, neoliberals' conception of like states. So I guess in your conception, if there's no state apparatuses, people will just attack each other. Do you read Hobbes by chance?
No, that's not. I'm guessing that's what it sounds like. I think people tend to form groups, and that eventually end up being societies. That just seems to be a tendency, and it seems to be one of the ways that you can sort of protect yourself. Is states seem to be one of the most reliable ways. Now, maybe there's a way that people have found that you can maintain sort of that kind of security that's necessary, and without the need of the state, and that's fine. And maybe you can want to work to get there. That's okay, right? But we know that there are certain things right now that help maintain the security of the state, and one of those would be, let's say, a tax base. We know that in order to maintain a tax base, you need a certain level of productivity in the country. In order to maintain a certain level of productivity in the country, you need some stability and productivity in the economy, which comes from economic policy.
Yeah, I'm saying in those cases, both of those can exist without a state. But I'm saying that it just seems like you kind of had the Hobbesian view there that without society, man is in a state of nature where it's war of all against all. That's what it was sort of sounding like when you're sort of going on there. Well, and that does seem to be pretty common amongst capitalists, to be honest.
I'm not making any comments on the nature of humans. I don't know what the nature of people are. I just know that you look at history, you look over time, you look at patterns of people becoming groups and attacking each other and killing each other. Like that just seems to be what happens.
Yeah, that's inferring a nature argument, right? Because I can say that there's also tons of groups probably just didn't attack each other and we just kind of lived in society, right? So yeah, if we're just saying that, if we're already starting with the assumption that yes, look at history, societies will attack each other, that is sort of leaning, I guess, towards that Hobbesian view of war of all against all type of thing.
But I don't think it's necessarily tied to nature. Like it's some of it is probably evolutionary. Sort of like you have societies that establish certain cultural patterns, and obviously, if you have a country that's going to go around murdering, killing every other country, and maintain a strong.
This is a whole other debate topic. I think the question was answered. So, Jago, do you have a question for either ThoughtBat or Neolib? I see your mic light up.
No, I don't. I'm gonna leave now. Thank you. Bye.
Okay, thank you. And SD, do you have any questions? I guess not. You would probably say something. Okay, people, thank you. I will now stop the recording. I certainly think that there is material and possibilities for a third part of this debate, but for today, we are finished.
Well, if anybody here can sort of like maybe explain, because it's possible that I'm not understanding what the circularness of my argument is here, because usually when sort of like I hear Bat explain back my position that is circular, it doesn't seem to be actually reflective of sort of like a principle that I have. So maybe.
So you're more or less saying that we have to prove something is work before we.
Oh, okay. Okay, hold on. So in my job, right? My job, what I have to do is I have to. It's just not paradoxical, man. So like, usually what I have to do, right, is I'll get in charge of something, right? We need to find a way to make money in this field, okay? So my job is to come up with experiments. Now I would never say this is how we make money like this when you're dealing with unknown technology. I would just never say that. I would say I'm gonna try this and see how it goes. A lot of times what ends up happening is that you try something, you're kind of there, but you're not, and then you got to switch gears and try something else. That's sort of the approach that I want to take that I take with anything. There's no paradox. You can still have that innovation. It's just that you're not doing it haphazardly. Everything is very carefully done. There's absolutely no paradoxical. I'm telling you, you can innovate this way, and you can innovate very productively and very quickly.
You're talking about systems, not policies. And they're two very different things. Systems are all-encompassing. Policies are not so. So you can experiment. You can experiment with a policy, right? You can experiment with company policy, but you can't experiment with an all-encompassing system. And
so it's not. Well, I'm not saying you have to experiment with the entire all-encompassing system. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Is that there are experiments that I think ought to be done, but it doesn't have to be system-wide. In fact, the last conversation I even explained it to you. I said you could start with maybe a city, then you go to a state, and probably once you're at the level of a state, you can probably safely say, okay, this is probably good for the entire